So Baruch Hashem, as you see on this table, I'm a Bal Simcha, and every time a new Sefer comes out, it is an occasion, an opportunity to express my profound Haidoya to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I stopped counting how many Sforim I produced. I think it's somewhere between 35 and 40 volumes. And I say, a new Sefer is like a new child in the family. Pri Ruchenu, Yotzei Chalotzeinu. And just as a person lives on in his children, Yankov Avinu lo meis, V'chi b'chdi chantu chanataya, V'chi b'chdi sabdo sabdenaya, the Gemara at the beginning of Tanis, Kol maniach ben kamoisoi, Ma'ala olav ki'ilu lo meis, and the Mashor explains, we live on our children, we live on the Torah that we live in this world, and Sefsois of Dovavois. I don't know anyone that has 40 children. But I assume if you have 40 children, you're a bit tired. I assume, I could just imagine. But you don't get tired even if you wrote 40 Sforim. And every Sefer number 40 is the same simcha as number 1. So, Ilu pinu moloi shiro kiyom al shanenu rinu kamoin galov ein onu maspikim lahoidois. And I thank you, Kodesh Baruch Hu, and especially Sharas Chuvas, which is a huge responsibility. So everybody learns Mechasot Shal Torah, Klalei Mitzvah is a very popular sefer. Just yesterday, a person came to see me. He's been through a difficult time, and he told me he learned many Sforim on Amunah V'Betochen, but he went through the entire Mechasot Shal Amunah V'Betochen, and he said, it did me more good than any other sefer I read on Emunah V'Betochen, and it meant so much to me. But Shuvas is the biggest responsibility. So, Baruch Hashem. So I thank you, Kodesh Baruch Hu, and I also thank my Talmidim. So Rabbeinu HaKodesh Lifnei Moisoi says his tzavor, Shimon b'ni Chacham, Gamliel b'ni Nosi. Shimon was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. So he said he's going to be the Rav. Gamliel has leadership. He's going to be the Nasi. Chanina bar Choma Yeshev Barosh. We learn a Medrash that Rebbe had a third son. His name was Yavitz, and he didn't give him any position. And of all his great Talmidim, and the first generation of Ameroim were all the Talmidim of Rabbeinu HaKodesh. Hagadol shebehem was Reb Chia, Reb Yochanan, Shlokish, Rav, and Shmuel. Why does he choose Chanina bar Choma to be the Rosh Hashiva? I think it's because Chanina bar Choma is the one that said, Harba lamadati meraboisai, mechavere yoisem mehem talmida yoisem mekulam. Rebbe should have been offended when he heard Reb Chanina say that. You learned a lot from your Rebbe, but from your friends you learn more. Really? Really? Rabbeinu HaKodesh should have been hurt. He's not hurt. He says, that's a real Rosh Hashiva. A Rosh Hashiva that appreciates how much he could learn from his Talmidim. And he appreciates what it is to be Melamed Torah Barabim. So he says, Chanina, he should be the Rosh Hashiva. He appreciates how much Talmidim could be Machkim Rabbi Seyim. And Rebbe's not offended. So I appreciate my Talmidim a lot, and I learn a lot from you. Some of you especially. So there are two Avreichim in the Kollel. From here I learn especially a lot. Needless to say, there's Shkol Rebbe Kiva, but Beinish isn't here, and he makes me smarter all the time. Reb Chaim sends me an email every now and then with Gewaldige Chidushim. Avromi Katz, Machkim Oti Kol Hazman, and many of you b'shas the Shir. So, harbe lamadati maraboisai, mechaveira yoisem hem, umetalmida yoisem ekolam. And when I say harbe lamadati maraboisai, today is the yortzeit of the Divrei Yatzer, of Mori Verabi, Tes Tammuz. I will never forget that Tes Tammuz, which happened to be Erev Shabbos Parshas Chukas, which is a Yom Tanis, and so harbe lamadati maraboisai, and it was a schus to be a Talmud and to observe one of the greatest Gedolim of our era, and a giant in so many different ways, in Gadlus B'Torah, in Talmud Torah, in Avas Torah, and Avodas Tefillah. So the Divrei Chaim was not only the founder of a Hasidic dynasty, and not only one of the great Rabbeim, the Divrei Chaim was unique in the story of Hasidus. Even in his time, so many different Rabbeim used to come to Tzanz, and many Hasidic Rabbeim were known to be gewaldige Gedolim, just to mention a few of them. The Lubavitcher, the Tzemach Tzedek, Shulchan Aruch Harav, his grandfather, Chidush Harim, the Avnei Nezer, who totally changed the Derech HaLimud in Poland. In the last generation, the Munkacharov, the Manchus Elazar. But the Divrei Chaim, more than any of the above-mentioned Gedolim, was considered to be the Posek Ador, together with Rabbi Yosef Shor Natanzon and Reb Shlomo Kluger, and all the major questions in his time came to him. And the 2 volumes of Tshuvas Divrei Chaim are phenomenal. And the Divrei Chaim was an ish koiles in Chesed. It is said that the Divrei Chaim never had a pruta overnight. All the money he had, boy biyomi, was machalek la'aniyim. He used to take loans, and every Erev Shabbos, Nechbodei HaKehillah used to collect his leichters, his pomutim, ladlukas ner Shabbos, because every week he gave it as a mashkin to get a loan to give money la'aniyim. So the Rosh HaKehillah used to check, where is your, what's a leichter in English? You know what leichters are? Pomutim, Nerot Shabbat. Who has it this week? And they used to get it just for Shabbos and give it back after Shabbos. And in many ways, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, my Rebbe, the Divrei Yasef, was an embodiment in our time of the Divrei Chaim. The only Rebbe in our Tkifa who was a real Godel B'Torah, and a renowned Godel B'Torah, 7 volumes of Shalos Tshuvos, which is a monumental work. And the Divrei Yatzev had a minig which no other Rebbe had since the Baal Shem Tov till his day and age. Tish Friday night, there was a pilpul, a pshetel, unheard of. The Divrei Chaim didn't have that minig. That's an original minig of the Divrei Yatzev. Used to give a pilpul in Lumdis, in Halacha, Friday night by the Tish. And I remember the days, you know, in his later years, there were thousands of Hasidim. But going back 50 years, Friday night by the Tish, there were 20 people, 25 people. 25 people, 23 were fast asleep when he said the pshetel. My father was usually the only one that followed him from beginning to end, because 2:30 in the morning, who was interested in hearing a pshetel? So, and many times people try to persuade him, why are you making this effort? I mean, nobody's really very interested. But his derech and avodas Hashem is, what you need to do regardless of what people say, whether people appreciate. He was going for heart surgery, and he was in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And Friday night, there were 3 people in the room, and he said, it's pshat. One of the 3 people was Rabbi Meir Eiserman, who was a modern Orthodox Rav in Minneapolis, right next to Rochester. and he came for Shabbos. He didn't know Yiddish. And the Rebbe, the whole Pshetel talked to him. And he was my neighbor, a very dear friend. And he said, I was like a tanagal sitting there. I don't understand one word Yiddish. There was no one else there, the Rebbe's son and me. And he said a Pshetel. He said, I enjoyed it greatly, but I didn't understand one word he was saying. That was his derech, avoida, and what needs to be said, as if he is speaking to Malachi Ashores and they're listening to his pshatel. So I think I have a lot of the little that I have achieved. I have a lot to thank for. Thank you, Kodesh Baruch Hu, and thank my great Rebbe, and Schusay Togan Oleinu. So today's shir is going to be a brief shir, not only because I have another shir this morning, because the subject matter is interesting, and I just mentioned before that my Talmidim make me wiser. A great part of today's shir is Maramakoimis that my son and Rabbeinish put together for me. Many times you heard from me, and this is a yesod I mentioned in my sforum, and also in many shiurim Baal Peh, that sometimes we learn not only from what is written, but also from what is not written. And a famous story of Reb Chaim Brisker, and I think the one that told the story was one of his later great Talmidim, Reb Cheskel Avramsky. So a person once came to Reb Chaim Soloveitchik to complain about the Chevra Kedisha, and he said, my father passed away very early in the morning, and another person at the killer passed away 2 hours later, and for some reason the Chevra Kedisha buried Mace number 2 before they buried and took care of my father. So he wants to call the Chevra Kedisha to the Torah, and Reb Chaim was taken aback, and he said, that was against Halacha. Takes out a Rambam, he looks in the Rambam, and in Hilchos Ovel, and he said, they did something very wrong, but you don't really have a claim. Person don't understand. Why don't I have a claim if they did something that's wrong? He went home, he opened the Rambam exactly where the Reb Chaim looked, and he saw nothing. Comes back to Reb Chaim and he says, Mehechen Dantuni. I looked where you looked. I saw nothing. So Reb Chaim explained, it's a sif in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Avelis that you need to bury the Mesim Lefi Seder P'tirosam. That's Meporish in Shulchan Aruch. Yeshua, his topic, is that a din in Kavod HaMeis, or is a din in Kedima b'mitzvahs? Kavod is a mitzvah, Kavod HaMeis is a mitzvah, and it's a din in Kedima b'mitzvahs. Said Reb Chaim, if it's a din in Kavod HaMeis, then Rambam should write it in Hilchos Ovel together with all the other dinim of Meis. If it's not there, then obviously it's a din in Kedima b'mitzvahs. So they did something wrong because they did against the sif in Shulchan Aruch, but you have no claim because doesn't affect you. It's not about Kavod HaMeis. It's their problem of Kedima b'mitzvahs. That's the story. So Reb Chaim learned from what's not written in Rambam. I personally think it is a din in Kavod HaMeis. Why is it in the Rambam? Good question. A good question. It's not in the Rambam because it's not in the Gemara. But it is in Shulchan Aruch. And I think probably is a din in Kavod HaMeis, but that is a separate. Many from this Rambam learn the halacha lagabe miles haben. If there are 2 brisin, boy biyom, we do the one that was burned earlier. That proves that it is a din in Kedima mitzvahs, because if it's in Kavod HaMeis, what does that have to do with miles tinok? So the fundamental question, could we learn from what is not written or only from what is written? In Kuntras Zeus Teiras Amincha. Are you familiar with this Kuntras? Yeah, do you have it? I think it should be reprinted. It never was published for the tzibur, only for, Talmidim. And as I said, I brought many sources. The base mayor in Siman Tov Mem Gimel and Hilchos Pesach, Noyach liyoysa lilmed mestimes harishonim mipirushon shel achroinim. That's a very powerful statement. Beis Shloime Yoredei Chelik Beis Memem. Im yesh mukom lechum lezu lo yemoret shelo yu maskira mechad Poskim rishonim v'achroinim. For Chazon Ishin, where the Chazon Ish makes this very powerful argument. Shviya Siman Zayin, Chazon Ish deals with the concept of likitoson ki echod. Legabe Chiyuv Peya Maises. Yesh oimer likitoson ki echod doesn't mean that the likit is actually performed in the same time, but it is ra'ui to be performed. That means that the Gemar Apri is more or less in the same period. And the Chazon Ish writes, why don't the Poskim say this? Shtikosam ki pirusham v'zeh belibi ha'achrua ha'yesera makol harayas. In the Shurim I give in Hilchos Neder recently, I spoke about a chumrah of the Pischei Tshuva, that ba'oina ha'somach leveset, if the issue is matron meiraglayim, we need to be choishish. Maybe there was argosha, maybe there was dam. Chazon Ish writes, Ilu hoyu adin de matolas meiraglayim itameya, vade lo hayu sotmim, kivin shadova motzui, va'al arov lo hoyso me'ila bedika, va'eichesh mitu apoiskim ikar zeh. Simen peites. And other than in Hilchos Neder, some Sefer writes that by undergarments which are fit the woman's body, there is no kula of bigdei tzavainim. Writes the Chazon Ish Tamur Moed. Ilo hoya chilik bedovar eich sotu ba'dovar kol hapoiskim v'natnu michshoy l'rabim. So he rejects this chumrah of the Chasam Sofer. Demai Simen Yudalet. Now, Lecha Oira, it goes against Chazon Ish Saf Seder Taharos. And I'm just reading the Chazon Ish Saf Seder Taharos. Ein lilmoid din mashmotas atov v'shulchan aruch. Ein lilmoid din mashmotas atov v'shulchan aruch. שלא יסמכו התורה ושכנוך מעולם להורות לנו מתוך השמטוסם. אדרבה. אם היו דעתם להוירויס לון שנשתן הדין, לא היו משמיטים והיו מפרשים. הרבה דינים שאינם כל כך מצויים השמט השכנוך, אף שהתור הביאוי. והרבה ששמיט גם התור, ודי לנו במה שפירשו. We don't learn a din from השמוטוס השכנוך. How does it go together with the previous four sources I quoted? Maybe more than would argue, we can't learn a din from the hashmot of any machaber mesuyim. We don't learn a din from hashmot shechanoch, but a din that is shachiach and nobody says it, that is a powerful argument. And I'll tell you what is the two examples in which I think the argument is so strong you can't even be mafakpik. In the past 200 years, Gedolim deal cotton shenas gadol b'yamei asvira. Does he count with a brocha or not? I think the first one maybe is the Birkei Yosef, the Chidush Harim, and I don't understand. This is a question that is nageya in every kehillah b'Yisrael, every year, for thousands of years. Nobody talked about it. It should be in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, and all the Rishonim Mefarshei Shas, the Rambam v'Noisei Kelev, the Tur v'Noisei Kelev, Shulchan Aruch v'Noisei Kelev. This is not only a shaila that is shachiach, it is inevitable in every shul. Sfiras Oimer is more than a month and a half out of 12 months. That means more than 10% of kids will have a bar mitzvah in the Yemei Asvira. Nobody thought of this. This proves beyond any level of doubt that it's not a shaila. Some Sefer says, Leil Yom Kippur, when you say Makadish, what's the nusach of Tfilis Yom Kippur? Machaper Avoniseyim, a lengthy nusach, you need to be mechaven to be yoitze the mitzvah of Kiddush Hayoim. Because Kiddush Alakos is the Rabbanon. And Kiddush Yom D'Oraisa. So you need to be machaven when you say the brocha. This shaila is nogeya not only in every kehillah, every Yid, every Yom Kippur. So up to the Chasam Sofer, nobody thought about this? Nobody. Nobody. No. From Antigonus Ish Socho and Shimon HaTzadik, Anshe Knesses Agdoyle, Tildach Sam Soifa, it didn't occur to anyone, you need to be Yoitze Kiddush, Belel Yom Kippurim. So this halacha cannot be true. If it would be true, everybody needs to say it, not somebody. So it depends what we're dealing with. So the Chassam Sofer writes, Ein le'namad mishmut shechanoch. Har bedinim, the Torah writes shechanoch does, because it's lo shechiach. So this brings us to a totally different question we discussed a lot of times in Darkei HaHiroah. How do we deal with the situation when the shechanoch is mashbet something that is in the Beis Yosef? The Chidah deals with this question 6 different sources, and I think I gave a shiur in the Kollel about this. And the Chidah says there are 3 possibilities. Milse de lo shchicha. Shechanoch wanted to have the shechanoch as precise and concise as possible. Lemnoi arichas. If it's lo shchiach, you're going to learn it till Beis Yosef. Maybe we could learn it from a different source. And sometimes it proves that the shechanoch decided, the Beis Yosef decided, litchois min halacha. I want to give 3 examples for each of these 3 scenarios. Ramah or Chaim Simen Tov Lamed Hey Sif Aleph. Those are the dinam of Achbar. And Achbar runs into a house and he had a piece of chametz in his mouth. What is the din? Kosav Haramah Sif Aleph. The Beis Yosef in Shechanoch writes the dinam of Achbar, but what he omits is a mouse ran in with a piece of chametz, another mouse ran out with a piece of chametz. Are we told it's probably the same piece of chametz, and you don't need to do a bedika, or maybe not? Maybe we're told the one that came out with a piece of chametz is not the one that went in, and you need to do bedika. The Ramah writes, Shechanoch ignores this because lo shachiach. Once upon a time, mice were everywhere. So it was shachiach that a mouse runs into the house and he has something in his mouth. But one goes in and one comes out and both have chametz in their mouths. That's lo shachiach, and that's why the Shechanoch just skipped it. This is an example in which the Ramah writes, that's the reason it's not in Shechanoch. Not because it's not a din. It's a Gemara, but it's a milse de lo shchicha. Yoredeya, Reish Manvov Sif Tes, and Hilches Kvoid Rav, and Shechanoch says, what are the seating arrangements in the Beis Medrash? Writes the Ramah once again, Shechanoch doesn't deal with the question when there is a Turgaman translating or transmitting what the Rav is saying. How would they be seated? Because it's a milse de lo shchicha. So twice in Orach Chaim and Yerodea, the Ramah says, why doesn't Shechanoch write it in? Because it's not shachiach. Shin Lamed Aleph, Sif Kuf Mem Vav. The Ramah explains, the Rambam doesn't write the dinam of Maser Oni, because we learn most of these halachas from Hilchas Tzedakah. That's an example of principle number 2 that the Chidah writes. If you could learn these halachas from another source in Shechanoch, the Beis Yosef decided, I don't need to write it twice. And that is why he skips many halachas of Maser Oni, because we can learn them from Hilchas Tzedakah. Choshe Mishpat Tov Chavav, a very well-known halacha. The Beis Yosef brings Hagoas Maimonios, that a person needs to put his life in jeopardy to save another person. And that's the story in Perek Zayin in Masechet Trumas in Yerushalmi. The Sma writes, it's a Beis Yosef, it's not Shechanoch, because Shechanoch decided, Ein ken halacha. And a person does not need to endanger himself, even a smaller level of danger, to save another person from a greater level of danger. So I gave 3 examples in which the Ramah And the Sma explain why do we find the Halacha B'S Yosef and it's not in the Shulchan Aruch. The Chazon Ish writes, many halachas are in the Tur and not in the Shulchan Aruch because they're not shechiach. But it is significant. The Chazon Ish writes, Ein lilmoid din mashmotos Shulchan Aruch. The B'S Yosef never intended we should learn from what he doesn't write, only from what he does write. So once again I say, not even the Shulchan Aruch, from no individual can we learn why didn't he bring the halacha. But the examples that I gave, which are milse de shchiche biyoyso, and nobody deals with these questions, that is proof. And that would be miyashav the Chazon Ish and Taharis from the previous sources. Igros Chazon Ish, Chelik Beis Siman Chof Aleph, quoting what the Chazon Ish writes. Mashmotas אפשר ללמד רק בדילוג סוגיה שהוא מבייס, אבל השמוtas דין בודד אינו מלמדנו כלום. שמדס הריב הרמב"ם ליטחויס חייבוסם להביא ולפרש, ולכן אין אנו תלמידים של הריב והרמב"ם בזה. Chazon Ish differentiates between the Ashmota of an entire sugya and the Ashmota of a prat mesuyim. This goes against the Chazon Ish by likitosoi ke'echod. It's just pshat what is likitosoi ke'echod. Birur Chaim. I know this younger man, a choshim younger man in Bnei Barak. He writes, I heard from Yankov Edelstein, who heard from Reb Mechel Yehuda Lefkovich, who heard from the Chazon Ish. And this is strange, and therefore I don't accept it, because it's Eid mipi Eid mipi Eid. The Mechaber, Reb Yankov Edelstein, Reb Mechel Yehuda, heard from the Chazon Ish. What's the story? What did they hear? So the Chazon Ish said, the Rambam did something superhuman no one else ever did, going through Kol HaTorah Kula, Kol Taryag Mises, Prateihen v'Digdukeihen, and giving a HaPsak and Kol HaTorah Kula. This is not menschliche koiches. This is Siyata D'Shmaya. So the Rambam had Siyata D'Shmaya what he wrote. He didn't have Siyata D'Shmaya what he didn't write. So we can't rely on what he didn't write, because there is no Siyata D'Shmaya of what you don't do. A person could only have Siyata D'Shmaya from what he does. I don't accept it, because if we assume that the Rambam didn't just forget things, and it was his responsibility, the Rambam writes in the Akdomet Mishnah Torah, you need to learn Tanakh and my Mishnah Torah. If we assume he didn't write something because he decided not to write it, that is the same Siyata D'Shmaya as what he did write. Why would it make a difference? So this argument just doesn't make sense. Another quote from the Chazon Ish, which is also strange in my eyes, Sefer Masa Ish. There are a lot of svorim about the Chazon Ish. I don't remember who is the Masa Ish. Is it Halperin? I don't remember who it is. Sefer Imres Moshe, the Keres Yankev, writes a letter. מה ששואל ממורן החזון איש על שמות הרמב"ם, לאשר כושר מועד הכסיב אל המורון, נצטוויסי להישב בשמוי. זו באמת שאלה גדולה. אין ביודי תשובה ברורה על זה. The Rambam also doesn't bring כל הסך שיחה בתהילה אויבה בעשר. צורך לא מי שסומך על מה שכוסה בהלכס תלמוד תורה, כל שאפשר לעסק בתורה, ואין הוא עסק בכלל כדבר השם בוזו. Doesn't make sense. This is שיחה בתהילה אויבה בעשר. אפשר לעסק בתורה ואין הוא עסק is different than שיחה בתהילה. כדבר השם בוזו, it's not אויבה בעשר. So the Chazon Ish said, that's what the Stipler writes, מפני הקיצר השמט כמה דינים, אשר אפשר ללמדו ממה שכוסף. גם כי הרמב"ם או יומויסף כמה פעמים והניח כמה הלוכס אמנה שיברר ויקרא בספר. There are certain halachas that the Rambam said, he left it for a later opportunity. You know, I didn't have time yet. אילו הרח הרמב"ם עוד כמה שונים, ודאי היה בו הסופס רבס. Strange. So he said the Rambam, Roy speak. If he would live many more years, then we have a bigger Rambam. Doesn't make sense. The Rambam writes, all you need to learn is Mishnah Torah. Doesn't make sense. Roy speak. You know, there are some lochas they left for another opportunity and he didn't get around to do it. And so what the Chazon Ish asked, why does the Rambam write Oiva Be'esa? Boror Bani is daiti, and I wrote it many times. The Rambam is Kovei Halacha. Oiva Be'esa is not a Halacha. It's Divrei Chasidus, Divrei Misa. It definitely isn't a Bitul Mitzvahs Asay. B'derech Hafloga, B'derech Musar, and there are hundreds of Mamora Musar in Shas that the Rambam doesn't bring. So don't see this as a kasha. So, Yoredei Chof Ches. Yoredei Chof Ches. We learn a halacha regarding Kisui Hadam. The Mordechai brings B'Shem HaGoinim, a Mahalach B'derech. Ein lei offer a chasois. Could take a cloth, soak up the blood, and when he's going to come to a place where there is offer, he's going to be seichet that beged, and he's going to become the mitzvah of Kisui Hadam. But when he soaks up the blood into the beged, he could make the brocha asher kedushono b'mitzvos of vitzivano. The Beis Yosef writes that none of the other poskim bring this, and it doesn't make sense, because how could you make a brocha when you're not mekayim the mitzvah of Kisui Hadam at all? You're going to mekayim the mitzvah of Kisui Hadam at a far later stage, when you're going to squeeze out the beged, and they're going to do Kisui Hadam. Ein halacha kedivrei ha'go'onim va'al kein hishmitu haposkim. The Rama disagrees, and the Rama says we make a broch al biur chometz a night before we do the biur by bedikas chometz, because that's the beginning of the process. One could say the same regarding Kisui Hadam. Do you agree with this svara? Well, could we disagree with the Rama? Aval yesh l'chalek tuva. Bedikas chometz and bitl chometz, that is oifen kiyum hamitzvahs. There's no other way. Ze ma shetiknu chachamim. All arbos of boitken es chometz, and tomorrow, besov zman, sovan es chometz. This is total coincidence. So it wouldn't be the same. But what's nagele in Yoneinu, מה שכוסף Beis Yosef הפוסקים השמיטו, לא ראינו אינו ראיה. לא ראינו אינו ראיה. It's not a ראיה. פוסקים השמיטו. And I think in this case, of course, the Rama is right. This is a milsa de lo shchicha. It's a special coincidence. You need to shecht a bird urgently, and you're in a place you don't have any offer. So this is not a halacha shchicha, so definitely you... So I think in this case the Rama would be right. Simen Kuf, once again a Mordechai. Bria einoi botla filo be'elef. Many Rishonim say, tough, Kuf Samach, 960, a beria is a bottle. I think when we learned Teruvis, we spoke about this. And the Beis Yosef says, most of the Rishonim disagree that if in the Rambam don't bring this halacha, ein halacha kemoisoi. Would the Rama say lo ru'inu ein raya? Of course not. I think this is an extremely powerful argument, because if Chazal say afilu be'elef lo bottle, and then comes along a Rishon and he says, no, it is bottle, in a bit less than elef, 960. So whoever doesn't bring this halacha is keilu beferish, afilu be'elef lo yibotl. When we learn Hilchos Chanukah, Maria Bohav says you could be madlik from Plaga Mincha. And some Achronim say, nobody disagrees with the Maria Bohav. So it's halacha psuka. And I say, if no, anyone that doesn't say you could is as if he said beferish you can't. Because all the Poskim deal zman adlaka. Is it shkia or tzeisa kechavim? Is it adshet tichla or ada boiker? All the Poskim deal with the zmane adlaka. And if you could be madlak meplag, anybody that doesn't say you could is as if he said you can't. So what is the maskona of today's shia? Whenever I learn about Klalei HaPsak, I say the most important klal in Klalei HaPsak is that there are no definitive Klalei HaPsak. And Klalei HaPsak are guidelines, fundamental rules, but it all depends on the details, and there is no uniform one klal. And I hope I made it clear in today's shia. Ein ledamois milsa lemilsa. And sometimes we could prove from what is not said, and sometimes we can't prove. And that is why we find in the Chazon Ish different tones and different leshonis. So it is only a Talmud Chochem that has the proper feel and the proper das Torah and the proper nesoyin that could really define when could we learn from what is not written and when can we only learn from what is written. So, Maskona de Milsa, one of the most important Klalei, it's not really a clear-cut klal, and ein ladayin ela masha ein avroyes, and we need to judge in every sigya into itself. But I think I gave some basic guidelines and some basic ideas in the sugya nechbedes. To what extent could we learn from what is not written and not only from what is written? So the story to begin with is an interesting case example. Sheyesh lo lekan ulachan. Yasher koyach. So the set